Greetings, I am Gresham and welcome back to Gresham Reads Graceling by Kristen Cashore. Now, last time, Katza and Poe were learning a little bit more about the limitations of Poe's and Katza's own semblance. For example, Katza and Poe spar in the middle of the night, and they notice that Poe has a slight advantage over Katza than normal, as Katza is now struggling to see him in the darkness of the night, whilst Poe is capable of sensing her. However, due to Katza's skill with combat, she still is able to defeat him. And they have learned that Katza is able to call for Poe mentally instead of physically. Excuse me. So, I do believe it is time to get into chapter 18, and from what I am seeing, this chapter will be a much longer one. So I do hope you are prepared. Chapter 18. The inn was a great, tall building made of solid lumber. The farther south one rode into Sundar, the heavier and thicker the wood of the trees, and the stronger and more imposing the houses and inns. Katza had not spent much time in central Sundar. Her uncle had sent her there 2 or 3 times, perhaps. But the wild forests and simple, sturdy little towns, too far from the borders to be involved in the nonsense of the kings, had always pleased Katza. The walls of the inn felt like castle walls, but darker and warmer. They sat at a table in a room full of men sitting at tables, heavy, dark tables built from the same wood as the walls. It was the time of day when men of the town and travelers alike poured into the inn's great eating room and sat down to talk and laugh over a cup of something strong to drink. The room had recovered from the hush that afflicted it when Poe and Katza first walked through the door. The men were noisy now and jovial, and if they did peek at the Graceling royalty over their cups and around their chairs, well, at least they did not stare outright. Poe sat back in his chair. His eyes flicked lazily around the room. He drank from his cup of cider, and his finger traced the wet ring it left on the table. He leaned his elbow on the table, and propped his head in his hand. He yawned. He looked, Katza thought, as if he only needed a lullaby, and he would nod off to sleep. It was a good act. His eyes flashed at her then, and then with a glimmer of a smile. "I don't think we'll stay long at this inn," he said, his voice low. "There are men in this room who are already taking an interest in us." Poe had informed the innkeeper that they would offer money for any information about the kidnapping of Grandfather Tilith. Men, particularly Sundarian men, if men are like their king, would do a great deal for money. They would change allegiances. They would tell truths they had promised not to reveal. They would also make up stories, but it didn't matter. For Poe could tell as much from a lie as he could from the truth. Katza sipped from her cup and looked out into the sea of men. The finery of the merchants stood out among the muted browns and oranges of the people of the town. Katza was the only woman in the room, save a harried serving girl, the innkeeper's daughter, who ran among the tables with a tray full of cups and pitchers. She was small in stature, dark and pretty, and a bit younger than Katza. She caught no one's eye as she worked, and didn't smile, except to the occasional townsman old enough to be her father. She had brought Katza and Poe their drinks silently, with only a quick, shy glance at Poe. Most of the men in the room showed her the proper respect, but Katza didn't much like the smiles on the faces of the merchants whose tables she served at the moment. "How old is that girl, do you think?" Katza asked. "Do you think she's married?" Poe watched the table of merchants and sipped from his drink. 16 or 17, I'd guess. She's not married. "How do you know?" "I don't. It was a guess." "It didn't sound like a guess." He drank from his cup. His face was impassive. It hadn't been a guess. This she knew, and it occurred to her suddenly how he could know such a thing with such certainty. She took a moment to nurse her irritation on behalf of every girl who'd ever admired Poe, and thought her feelings private. "You're impossible," she said. "You're no better than those merchants. And besides, just because she has her eyes on you doesn't mean—" "And that's not fair," Poe protested. "I cannot help what I know. The error was in revealing it to you. I'm not used to traveling with someone who knows my grace." I spoke before thinking with how unfair it would be. To the girl. She rolled her eyes. "Spare me your confessions. If she's unmarried, I don't understand why her father sends her out to serve these men. I'm not certain she's safe among them." "Her father stands at the bar most of the time. No one would dare harm her." "But he's not there always. He's not there now. And just because they don't assault her doesn't mean they respect her. Or that they would not seek her out later." The girls circled the table of merchants, pouring cider into each cup. When one of the men reached for her arm, she recoiled. The merchants burst into laughter. The man reached out to her then and drew back, reaching out and drew back, taunting her. His friends laughed harder. And then the man at the girl's other side grabbed her wrist and held on, and there was a great whoop from the men. She tried to pull away, but the laughing man wouldn't let go. Red with shame, she looked into none of their faces, only pulled at her arm. She was too much like a dumb, confused rabbit caught in a trap. And suddenly Katza was standing. And Poe was standing too, and he had Katza by the arm. For an instant, Katza appreciated the strange symmetry, except that unlike the servant girl, she could break from Poe's grip. And unlike the merchant, Poe had good reason to hold her arm. And Katza wouldn't break from the grip of his fingers, for she didn't need to. Her rise to her feet had been enough. The room froze in stillness. The man dropped the girl's arms. He stared at Katza with a white face and an open mouth. Fear, as familiar to Katza as the feel of her own body. The girl stared too, and caught her breath and pressed her hand to her chest. "Sit down, Katza." Poe's voice was low. "It's over. Sit down." She did sit down. The room let out its breath. After a few moments, voices murmured, then talked and laughed again. But Katza wasn't sure that it was over. Perhaps it was over with this girl and these merchants, but there would be a new group of merchants tomorrow. And these merchants would move on and find themselves another girl. Later that evening, as Katza prepared for bed, two girls came to her room to cut her hair. Is it too late, my lady? Asked the elder, who carried the scissors and a brush. No, the sooner I have it off, the better. Please come in. They were young, younger than the serving girl. The younger, a child of 10 or 11 years, carried a broom and a dustpan. They sat Katza down and moved around her shyly. They spoke little, breathless around her. Not quite frightened, but near to it. The older girl untied Katza's hair and began to work her fingers through the tangle. Forgive me if I hurt you, my lady. It won't hurt me, Katza said, and you needn't unravel the knots. I want you to cut it all off, as short as you can, as short as a man's. The eyes of both girls widened. I've cut the hair of many men, the older girl said. You may cut mine just as you've cut theirs, Katza said. The shorter you cut it, the happier I'll be. The scissors snipped around Katza's ears, and her head grew lighter and lighter. How odd to turn her neck and not feel the pull of hair, the heavy snarl swinging around behind her. The younger girl held the broom and swept the hair clippings away the instant they fell to the floor. Is it your sister I saw serving drinks in the eating room? Katza asked. Yes, my lady. How old is she? 16, my lady. And you? I'm 14, and my sister 11, my lady. Katza watched the younger girl collecting hair with a broom taller than she was. Does anyone teach the girls of the inn to protect themselves? She asked. Do you carry a knife? Our father protects us, and our brother, the girl said simply. The girls clipped and swept, and Katza's hair fell away. She thrilled at the unfamiliar chill of air on her neck, and wondered if other girls in Sunder and across the 7 kingdoms carried knives, or if they all looked to their fathers and brothers for every protection. A knock woke her up. A knock woke her. She sat up. It came from the door that adjoined her room to Poe's. She hadn't been asleep long, and it was midnight, and enough moonlight spilled through the window so that if it wasn't Poe who knocked, and if it was an enemy, she could see well enough to beat the person senseless. All these thoughts swept through her mind in the instant she sat up. Katza, it is only I. His voice called through the keyhole. It's a double lock. You must unlock it from your side. She rolled out of bed. And where was the key? My key was hanging beside the door. He called, and she took a moment to glare in his general direction. I only guessed you were looking for the key. It wasn't my grace, so you needn't get all huffy about it. Katza felt along the wall. Her fingers touched the key. Doesn't it make you nervous to holler like that? Anyone could hear you. You could be revealing your precious grace to a whole legion of my lovers. And I wouldn't. His laughter came muffled through the door, and I would know if he had heard my voice. And I'd also know if you were in there with a legion of lovers. Katza, you cut your hair. She snorted. Wonderful. That's just wonderful. I have no privacy, and you sense even my hair. She turned the key in the lock and swung the door open. Poe straightened, a candle in his hand. Great seas, he said. What do you want? He held his candle up to her face. Poe, what do you want? She did a far better job than I would have done. I'm going back to bed, Katza said, and she reached for the door. All right, the men, the merchants. Sundaran men who are bothering that girl. I think they intend to come to us this night and speak to us. How do you know this? Their rooms are below us. She shook her head, disbelieving. No one in this inn has privacy. My sense of them is faint, Katza. I cannot sense everyone down to the end of their hair as I do you. She sighed. What an honor, then, to be me. You're coming in the middle of the night? Yes. Do they have information? I believe they do. Do you trust them? Not particularly. I think they'll come soon, Katza. When they do, I'll knock on your outer door. Katza nodded. Very well. I'll be ready. She stepped back into her room and pulled the door behind her. She lit a candle, splashed water on her face, and prepared herself for the arrival of the late-night merchants. 6 merchants had sat around the table in the eating room and laughed at the serving girl. When Poe's knock had brought her to the door, she found him standing in the hallway with all 6, each carrying a candle that cast a dark light over a bearded face. They were tall and broad-backed, all 6 of them, enormous next to her, and even the smallest was taller and broader than Poe. Quite a band of bullies. She followed them back to Poe's room. You're awake and dressed, my prince, my lady, the biggest of the merchants said as they filed into Poe's chamber. It was the man who'd first tried to grab the girl's arm, the one who'd first teased her. Katza registered their mockery as he spoke their titles. He had no more respect for them than they had for him. The one who had taken the girl's wrist stood beside him, and the two seemed to be the leaders of the group. They stood together in the middle of the room, facing Poe, while the other 4 faded into the background. They were well spread out, these merchants. Katza moved to the side door, the door that led to her room, and leaned against it with her arms crossed. She was steps from Poe and the 2 leaders, and she could see the other 4. It was more precaution than was necessary, but it didn't hurt for any of them to know she was watching. We've been receiving visitors throughout the night, Poe said, an easy lie. You're not the only travelers at the inn who have information about my grandfather. Be careful of the others, Lord Prince, said the biggest merchant. Men will lie for money. Poe raised an eyebrow. Thank you for your warning. He slouched against the table behind him and put his hands in his pockets. Katza swallowed her smile. She rather enjoyed Poe's cocky laziness. What information do you have for us? Poe asked. How much will you pay? The man said. I'll pay whatever the information warrants. There are 6 of us, the man said. I'll give it to you in coins divisible by 6, Poe said, if that is what you wish. I meant, Lord Prince, that it's not worth our time to divulge information if you will not compensate us enough for 6 men. Poe chose that moment to yawn. When he spoke, his voice was calm, even friendly. I won't haggle over a price when I don't even know the breadth of your information. You'll be fairly compensated. If that doesn't satisfy you, you're free to leave. The man rocked on his feet for a moment. He glanced sideways at his partner. His partner nodded and the man cleared his throat. Very well, he said. We have information that links the kidnapping to King Byrne of Western. How interesting, Poe said, and the farce had begun. Poe asked all the questions one would ask if one were conducting this interrogation seriously. What was the source of their information? Was the man trustworthy who had spoken of Byrne? What was the motivation for the kidnapping? Had Byrne the assistance of any other kingdoms? Was Grandfather Tileth in Byrne's dungeons? How were Byrne's dungeons guarded? Well, lady, Poe said with a glance in her direction. We'll have to send word quickly so that my brothers know to investigate the dungeons of Byrne of Wester. You won't travel there yourselves? The man was surprised and disappointed, most likely that he hadn't managed to send Poe and Katza on a futile mission. We go south and east, Poe said, to Monsean and King Leck. Leck was not responsible for the kidnapping, the man said. I never said he was. Leck is blameless. You waste your energy searching Monsean when your grandfather is in Wester. Poe yawned again. He shifted his weight against the table and crossed his arms. He looked back at the man blandly. We don't go to Monsean in search of my grandfather, he said. It is a social visit. My father's sister is the Queen of Monsean. She's been most distressed by the kidnapping. We mean to call on her. Perhaps we can bring the comfort of your news to the Monsean court. One of the merchants in the background cleared his throat. A lot of sickness there, he said from the corner, at the Monsean court. Poe's eyes moved to the man calmly. Is that so? The man grunted. I have family in Leck's service, distant family. 2 little girls who work in his shelter, cousins of some kind. Well, they died a few months back. What do you mean, in his shelter? Leck's animal shelter. He rescues animals, Lord Prince. You'll know that. Yes, of course, Poe said. But I didn't know about the shelter. The man seemed to enjoy being the center of Poe's attention. He glanced at his companions and lifted his chin. Well, Lord Prince, he's got hundreds of them. Dogs, squirrels, rabbits, bleeding from slashes on their backs and bellies. Poe narrowed his eyes. Slashes on their backs and bellies? He repeated carefully. You know, as if they'd run into something sharp, the man said. Poe stared at him for a moment. Of course. And any broken bones? Any sickness? The man considered. I've never heard tell of any of that, Lord Prince. Just lots of cuts and slashes that take wondrous long time to heal. He's got a staff of children who help him nurse little creatures to recovery. They say he's very dedicated to his animals. Poe pursed his lips. He glanced at Katza. I see, he said. And do you know what sickness the girls died of? The man shrugged. Children are not very strong. We've moved on to a different topic now, the biggest merchant said, interrupting. We agreed to give you information about the kidnapping, not about this. We'll be wanting more money to compensate. And anyway, I'm suddenly dying of a sickness called boredom, his partner said. Oh, said the first. Perhaps you have a more amusing diversion in mind. With different company, said the man in the corner. They were laughing now, the 6 of them chuckling over a private joke. Katza had a feeling she understood. Alas for protective fathers and locked bedroom doors, the partner said, very low to his friends, but not too low for Katza's sensitive ears. She surged toward the men before the burst of laughter had even begun. Poe blocked her so fast that she knew he must have started imperceptibly first. Stop, he said to her softly. Think. Breathe. The wave of impulsive anger swept over her, and she allowed his body to block her path to the merchant, to the two of them, to all six of them. For these men were all the same to her. "You're the only man in the Seven Kingdoms who can keep that wildcat on a leash," said one of the two men. She wasn't sure which one, for she was distracted by the effects that Poe's words had on her. By the words had on Poe's face. "It is fortunate for us she has such a sensible keeper," the man continued. "And you're a lucky fellow yourself. The wild ones are the most fun if you can control them." Poe looked at her, but he didn't see her. His eyes snapped, silver ice and gold fire. The arm that blocked her stiffened, and his hand tightened into a fist. He inhaled endlessly, it seems. He was furious. She saw this, and she thought he was going to strike the man who had spoken. And for a panicky moment, she didn't know whether to stop him or help him. Stop him. She would stop him, for he wasn't thinking. She took his forearms and gripped them tightly. She thought his name into his head. Poe. Stop. Think. She thought into his mind, just as he had said to her. Think. He began to breathe out, as slowly as he had breathed in. His eyes refocused and he saw her. He turned around and stood beside her. He faced the two men. It didn't even matter which of them had spoken. "Get out." His voice was very quiet. "We would have our payment." Poe took a step toward the man, and they stepped back. He held his arms at his side in a casual calmness that didn't fool anyone in the room. "Have you the slightest notion of whom you are speaking?" he asked. "Do you imagine you'll receive a coin of my money when you've spoken this way? You're lucky I let you go without knocking your teeth from your mouths." "Are you sure we shouldn't?" Katza said, looking into the eyes of each man, one after the other. "I'd like to do something to discourage them from touching the innkeeper's daughter." "We won't," one of them gasped. "We won't touch you, no one. Swear it." "You'll be sorry if you do," she said. "Sorry for the rest of your short, wretched lives." "We won't, my lady. We won't." They backed to the door, their faces white, their smirks vanished now. "It was only a joke, my lady. I swear it." "Get out," Poe said. "Your payment is that we won't kill you for your insults." The men scrambled from the room. Poe slammed the door behind them. Then he leaned his back against the door. Forgive me. Then he leaned his back against the door and slid down until he sat on the floor. He rubbed his face with his hands and heaved a deep sigh. Katza took a candle from the table and came to crouch before him. She tried to measure his tiredness and his anger, in the bend of his head and the hardness of his shoulders. He dropped his hands from his face and rested his head against the door. He watched her face for a moment. "I truly thought I might hurt that man," he said, "very badly." "I didn't know you were capable of such temper." "Apparently I am." "Poe," Katza said, as a thought occurred to her. "How did you know I intended to attack them? My intentions toward them were toward them, not you." "Yes, but my sense of your energy heightened suddenly, and I know you well enough to guess when you're likely to take a swing at someone." He half smiled tiredly. "No one could ever accuse you of being inconsistent." She snorted. She sat on the floor before him and crossed her legs. "And now you will tell me what you learned from them?" "Yes." He closed his eyes. "What I learned to start with, other than that fellow in the corner that barely spoke a true word. It was a game. He wanted to trick us into paying them for false information, to get back at us for the incident in the eating room. They're small-minded, Katza said. Very small-minded. But they've helped us nonetheless. It's Leck, Katza. I'm sure of it. The man lied when he said Leck was not responsible. And yet there was something else very strange that I could make no sense of. He shook his head and stared into his hands, thinking. It's so odd, Katza. I felt this strange defensiveness rising. What do you mean, defensiveness? As if they all truly believed Leck's innocent and wished to defend him to me. But you just said Leck is guilty. He is guilty, and these men know it. But they also believe him innocent. That makes utterly no sense. He shook his head again. I know, but I'm sure of what I sensed. I tell you, Katza, the man said that Leck was not responsible for the kidnapping. He was lying. But he said a moment later, Leck is blameless. He meant it. He believed himself to be telling the truth. Are we supposed to conclude that Leck kidnapped my grandfather? But for some innocent reason, it simply cannot be. Katza couldn't comprehend the things Poe had learned, any more than she could comprehend the manner in which he had learned them. None of this makes sense, she said weakly. He came out of his thoughts for a moment and focused on her. Katza, I'm sorry. This must be overwhelming to you. I'm capable of sensing quite a lot, you see. From people who want to fool me but don't know to guard their thoughts and feelings. She couldn't understand it. She gave up trying to make sense of the king who was both guilty and innocent. She watched Poe as he became distracted by his thoughts again, and stared again into his hands. The merchants hadn't known to guard their thoughts and feelings. If it was a thing that could be done, then she, at least, wanted to learn how to do it. She felt his eyes and realized he was watching her. You do keep some things from me, he said. She started and focused on the blankness for a moment. Or you have, he continued. Since you've learned of my grace, I mean. I felt you keeping things from me. You're doing it now, and I can tell you it works. Because my grace shows me nothing. I'm always a bit relieved when it works, Katza. Truly, I don't wish to take your secrets from you. He sat up straight, his face lit with an idea. You know, you could always knock me unconscious. I won't stop you. Katza laughed then. I wouldn't. I've promised you I won't hit you except in our practices. But it's self-defense in this case. It is not. It is, he insisted, and she laughed again at his earnestness. I'd rather strengthen my mind against you, she said, than knock you out every time I have a thought I don't want you to know. Yes, well, and I'd prefer that also, believe me. But I grant you permission to knock me out if you ever need to. I wish you wouldn't. You know how impulsive I am. I don't care. If you grant me permission, I'll probably do it, Poe. I'll probably... He held up his hand. It's an equalizer. When we fight, you hold your grace back. I can't hold my grace back, so you must have the right to defend yourself. She didn't like it, but she could not miss his point. And she could not miss his willingness, his dear willingness to give over his grace for her. You will always have a headache, she warned. Perhaps Raffin included his salve for headaches among the medicines. I should like to change my hair now that you've changed yours. Blue would suit me, don't you think? She was laughing again, and she swore to herself that she wouldn't hit him. She wouldn't, unless she were entirely desperate. And then the candle on the floor beside them dimmed and died. Their conversation had gotten entirely off track. They were leaving for Monsean early in the morning, most likely, and it was the middle of the night, and everyone in the inn and of town slept. Yet here they were, sitting on the floor, laughing in the dark. We leave for We leave for Monsean tomorrow, then, she said. We'll fall asleep on our horses. I'll fall asleep on my horse. You'll ride as if you slept for days, as if it's a race between us to see who reaches Monsean first. And what will we find when we get there? A king who's innocent of things of which he's guilty? He rubbed his head. I've always thought it strange that my mother and father had no suspicions about Leck, even knowing his story. And now these men seem to think him blameless in the kidnapping, even knowing he's not. Can he be so kind in the rest of his life that everyone forgives his crimes or fails to see them? He sat for a moment quietly. I've wondered. It occurs to me that recently that he could be graced. That he could have a grace that changes the way people think of him. Are there such graces? I don't know. It had never occurred to her, but he could be graced. With one eye missing, he could be graced and no one would ever know. No one would even suspect, for who could suspect a grace that can control suspicions? He could have the grace of... Again, wrong one. He could have the grace of fooling people, Poe said. The grace of confusing people with lies. Lies that spread from kingdom to kingdom. Imagine it, Katsa. People carrying his lies in their own mouths and spreading them to believing ears. Absurd lies, erasing logic and truth, all the way to Lynid. Can you imagine the power of a person who had such a grace? He could create whatever reputation for himself he wished. He could take whatever he wanted, and no one would ever hold him responsible. Katsa thought of the boy who was named Heir, and the king and queen who died shortly thereafter. The advisors who had supposedly jumped into the river together, and a whole kingdom of mourners who never thought to question the boy who had no family, no past, no Monsean blood flowing through his veins, but who had become king. But his kindness, Katsa said urgently. The animals, the man spoke of the animals he restores to health. And that's the other thing, Poe said. That man truly believed in Leck's philanthropy. But am I the only person who finds it a bit odd that there should be so many slashed up dogs and squirrels in Monsean that need rescuing? Are the trees and rocks made of broken glass? But he's a kind man if he cares for them. Poe peered at Katsa strangely. You're defending him too, in the face of logic that tells you not to. Just like my parents, and just like those merchants. He's got hundreds of animals with bizarre cuts that don't heal, Katsa, and children in his employ dying of mysterious illnesses, and you're not the slightest bit suspicious. He was right. Katsa saw it, and the truth in all its gruesomeness trickled into her mind. She began to have a conception of a power that spread like a bad feeling, like a sickness itself, seizing all minds that it touched. Could there be a grace more dangerous than one that replaced sight with the fog of falseness? Katsa shuddered, for she would be in the presence of this king soon enough. She wasn't certain what defense even she could raise against a man who could fool her into believing his innocent reputation. Her eyes traced Poe's silhouette, dark against the black door. His white shirt was the only part of him truly visible, a luminous gray in the darkness. She wished, suddenly, that she could see him better. He pulled her to the window and looked down into her face. The moonlight caught a glimmer of his silver eye, and a gleam in the gold of his ear. She didn't know why she had felt so anxious, or why the lines of his nose and his mouth, or the concern in his eyes, should comfort her. "What is it?" he asked. "What's bothering you?" "If Leck has this grace as you suspect," she began. "Yes? How will I protect myself from him?" He considered her seriously. "Well, that's easy," he said. "My grace will protect me from him, and I'll protect you. We'll be safe with me, Katza." In her bed, thoughts swirled like a windstorm in her mind, but she ordered herself to sleep. In an instant, the storm quieted. She slept under a blanket of calm. Well, that is it for chapter 18. It certainly seems as if the chapters are getting longer, and with a startling revelation. To think there is a Leck, to think there is a grace that... to think there is a grace capable of altering the ways you can think. It's interesting to think of, and also terrifying. It makes me wonder of his past.
If you wish to know his past, you could read Fire.
What do you mean?
Leck is actually in Fire. It's part of that tale is the tale of how he got into the Seven Kingdoms.
Interesting. Now we'll have to read that one next, then. Assuming there is no other suggestion for stories.
Yeah. It's really up to the viewers if they wish to hear another story. Maybe they want you to read another H.P. Lovecraft or something else. We'll have to wait and see.
Yes, it certainly seems that way. But I believe that we'll call it for now. Thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video and this chapter, be sure to leave a like and a comment down below telling your favorite part. And if you enjoy the content on this channel, feel free to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you know whenever we upload. And feel free to share this video. It will certainly do nothing more than help the channel out. Now I am Gresham, and I will see you for the next chapter.